and welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're rather lucky to have the splendid Oberheim OB-X8. This is an 8-voice analog polysynth made under the Oberheim name. Now, the story of the Oberheim name is quite long and involved, but essentially it goes along the lines of Tom Oberheim, maker of great synthesizers and other technologies, lost the name and the brand, and it kind of did that stuff that corporations do. He eventually got it back, and along with the help of Marcus Ryle, who was a previous employee and also man behind such technologies as ADAT and Line 6 and all those kind of things, they got it back together and he got the name back, which was great. So Tom Oberheim can now, you'd think it was obvious, can make synthesizers under the name Oberheim, and that's what we have here. And this is the sort of culmination of all of those plans coming together in the form of a big fat old analog polysynth. Now, it has extra poignancy because obviously this is one of the last projects that Dave Smith worked on before he passed. And I know they were great friends and long-time comrades in arms, as many synthesizer makers throughout those years were. And it's a sort of heartwarming story. So it represents a lot of legacy and history and all those good things. As you may have noticed in the intro, this video is sponsored by GPU Audio. We thank them very much for their support. GPU Audio are bringing their patented next-generation technology to producers, musicians and sound engineers, offering ultra-low latencies, continuous machine learning and vast scalability made possible by your computer's graphics card. They're about to release a beta suite of plugins covering the essential effects you need, starting off with the modulation bundle featuring chorus, phaser and flanger, all running on the power of your GPU. They also have an SDK on the horizon, giving third-party developers the opportunity to explore and create the next generation of audio plugins and effects. Apple support is also in the works. Be the first to download the free modulation bundle by signing up at gpu.audio/sonicstate. So let's just enjoy the largesse and the construction of this. We've got nice wooden end cheeks, not kind of sure what wood this is, but it looks like a nice hardwood. Very solid construction on the top surface. We've got these lovely big old school kind of tab buttons. Nice solid potentiometers, lots of space on the front panel. Over here we've also got the kind of the nicely constructed and very familiar old school Oberheim levers, which actually default to being towards you for positives. You can set that the other way around, but really nicely built. I mean, there's no kind of wibble and wobble in this. I mean, as you'd expect, I mean, for a £5 or so synth, you'd want this to be chunky and nicely built, and it really doesn't disappoint there. So let's get on to some sounds. Probably the best thing to do, because I think once you hear it, you kind of think, oh yeah, that's what Oberheim is, because not everybody is familiar with Oberheim, because like I said, you know, you don't get your hands on these things, the originals, very often, certainly not in the UK. So let's start with patch 1, bank 1. I did play this in the intro video that I shot, but and you can hear it's got that kind of quite familiar sound. I think the thing about these Oberheim polysynths is what they had at the time was this ability to spread stereo voices, and they were amongst the first to kind of create these kind of wide polysynth pads by sort of throwing the voices in and out. And also we've got the sound of those lovely filters. Okay, let's go on to Bank OB-X8 Group 2. This has got an arpeggiator. It sounds like it's got delays, but I think that's LFO. Yeah, I'm bringing in the aftertouch. Yeah, there are no effects built into this synth, and that was something, when I spoke to Marcus Ryle at Super Booth, it was a very conscious thing. They just wanted to focus on the pure, sort of raw, classic Oberheim sound. And while I can understand that, I do feel like for the money you'd want to, you know, maybe have a little bit of effects. If I just put my particle reverb on here on some of these sounds, it's just, it really does. Yeah, I know. I mean, I put long reverbs and everything, but, you know, just a little bit of extra effects does make a difference. But they chose not to, and that's just the way it goes. Right, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the oscillators. I've got this nice view here. So we'll start off each of the two oscillators. Basically, if you have nothing lit, you get a triangle wave. And this is tunable over semitones. Nice solid fundamental. Then we go into sawtooth. Again, really nice and buzzy. Then we got a pulse. We can change the pulse width. Then we can also add saw and pulse together. And we get kind of interesting harmonic extra content here. And of course, same goes for the second oscillator, which we could bring in, just bring into the filter. Now you may notice there's no mix control on the front panel. There isn't actually an oscillator mix mode, and I must admit I would like to have seen that. I'm sure they could have fitted it in. I suppose it would have messed with the aesthetic, but again, that is in page 2. So if we come back here, oscillator 1 level, oscillator 2 level. Now, this is, you know, these are the sort of things that you might think, oh, it's a bit of a drag, isn't it? But you can switch things into panel mode when you hit page 2. In the global settings, press global, and we can say, let's have, I'll just get it, page 2 edit mode, display only, but we can actually have it go to the panel, which means that when you come into page 2, some of these knobs do different things, but they don't necessarily do the things that you might expect them to do. It's something you'll have to learn. So there is a sort of way around it, but you know, it's perhaps not as intuitive as I would personally like, given how much synth there is. But you know, you can get around pretty quickly. It's not the end of the world. Now, of course, unison detune is one of the really nice sounds that we can get here. Let's just get a demo of that. This is, again, just a single sawtooth. Put that in unison mode. In page 2, I can set the amount of detune. If I just bring the display up, we set the amount of detune. And also, one thing that I can do is, which is going to be really nice, let's see, let's go to, let's get the panning as well. Bring a bit of resonance. Bring another oscillator in. Absolutely massive, and some of those bass patches, which are huge in stereo, totally doable with this Oberheim as well. And of course, oscillator sync, big part of the OB sound. Let's just bring that up here. We go triangle in here. Let's make this a pulse sound. Switch the sync on. Really nice, and of course we could modulate that from the LFO. Or via the pitch envelope, the filter envelope. By pressing this button here, we get the filter envelope is mapped to the frequency of oscillator 2. Get that in unison. Nice. And there are some great patches in here which show this. You get some really subtle sync effects on pads which just sound really delightful. Just like this one, in fact. Stick a bit of reverb on that. Very nice. So if I just play this, I've just got a regular triangle on the oscillator 1. Now pressing this button once brings oscillator 2 sawtooth to modulate the frequency of oscillator 1. There is no depth control like the original, but there is a page 2 function, which is, if I press this guy, we can take the triangle and set the amount of depth here. So we do get, this is a new feature for the OB-X8, so page 2 gives us a little bit more control, but we can have both at the same time for some real mad stuff. There is more to these oscillators. I mean, I think because they're sort of at the heart of what can make this sound good, obviously the filter as well, it's worth spending a bit of time on. So if we bring oscillator 2 in, and now we've got the detune knob. Rather than having the fine control here on the frequency of each oscillator, we could just detune oscillator 2 against oscillator 1. Let's bring the filter down. Let's bring that pan width up. In fact, what we can do, the stereo width rather, pan mode, we could go mono, we could go spread, we can do splayed, we can do ping pong, we can do 4 left and 4 right. So there are lots of different modes for this. So you can choose which one. Again, that widens it up nicely. But while we're here, we should take a look at vintage mode, because that's also kind of a key feature. The thing about vintage mode, we've got the dedicated knob here. The thing about modern polysynths is, because they're modern, you know, we want them to be in tune, and we want them to be tracking, we want them to kind of work right, okay? And so the engineers spend quite a lot of time making sure that all of this is going to be kind of tickety-boom. But sometimes with the older synths, it's that inaccuracy, that kind of wonkiness that made them, sort of endeared them to us. It gave them more of an analogue vibe. So if we just bring this up, let's take the pan mode, we'll bring it back to mono. Open this up a bit. I'll bring some resonance in. So that's with no vintage mode. I'll start bringing the vintage mode in. I don't know if you can hear, as I bring it up, there's variance, because each time you press a key on this, you're cycling through one of the voice cards. 8 voices, each voice, it starts to get less accurate. You can hear there's variance in pitches there. If I bring the resonance right up, you can also hear there's variance in the resonance of the filter. So what it actually is doing, the vintage knob, is kind of introducing this notion of oldness and sort of wrongness, which, as we say, you know, it's what made some of these older synths so charming and so unique, is the fact that they have this inherent inaccuracy, and it kind of makes everything sort of grow and fill the space with pitch and filter variance. So that's the vintage knob. Anyway, okay, time for a couple more sounds. I've got a bit of reverb on this, and you can hear the aftertouch working there. It would have been so lovely to have poly aftertouch, wouldn't it? This one, I think, has probably got, looks like there's a filter, SEM 2-pole notch. And I'm modulating. It's a lovely, subtle sound. Very nice. Here's another one. I haven't named any of these, actually, but I will dump them out, and if any of you have got a an OBX8, you're welcome to have them on the Patreon. Incidentally, we will also be posting some video extra stuff, which is an exclusive video extra to our reviews that we're posting for our upper tier Patreon users. So please do join us if you're interested. There's lots of other good stuff there besides. So yeah, this one is just, I've got just a reverb on it. This is using the 4-pole. And I'm using sync. sure how much resonance I've got on here, and that would be something that would be quite nice to be able to see if there was a sort of, because when you're calling up a preset, you don't know where any of these parameters are. It would just be lovely if there was just maybe even just a little indicator. I know this display is quite small, so we can't fit much on it, but if there was just a sort of couple of dots that was like you're above, you're below, that would just be kind of helpful to know where you were. But this is nice, isn't it? This is a unison sound. Anyway, perhaps enough of the sounds for now. Let's get back onto some of the extra features. And we should really look at the LFO, because the LFO, again, I mean, it takes up a lot of space. Single LFO with 2 modulation buses that we've got here. But there are also a couple of page 2 features that make it a bit more interesting. Sorry, I was just going to do the LFO, wasn't I? And then as I was doing it, I found that delightful patch, which funnily enough does use the LFO and some of the extra features, so all is good. But yeah, that isn't that nice. I've got some reverb, but I've got 2 oscillators. One is a 5th above, I think, and I've just got these interesting modulations going on. So, single LFO, there's actually 1 for each group of voices, so 2 total, with 2 buses effectively, and you can set the depth of each bus separately, and you can route each bus to each of these just by sort of a basic toggle switch. Now, if I just come to a basic patch here, and we'll route that to oscillator 1. That's all well and good. That's the how fast it goes. I think it goes up to 50 hertz, but it goes down if I bring the filter in. Down, I think it goes down to, a cycle can be 15 seconds long, so we can get very slow. We can pluck out those harmonics, which is kind of cool. And if we go to page 2, there's all sorts of additional LFO parameters. Now, 2 types of LFO, we'll stick with that for the time being. Keyboard trigger on and off, so if I now put the release up on this, that means each key press triggers a new LFO cycle, 1 for each group of 4 voices, and you can hear them cascading over each other. There's also the trigger point, which I think at which point in the cycle it will start to work, so you can kind of offset that to a degree. Keyboard track. So further up the keyboard it gets faster. LFO sample and hold in. Shift the voice, we can actually, on voices we can shift the phase of the LFO in voice sets by 90 and 180 degrees. And page 2, this is then we've got mod delay time, so we can have a delay, but we can also then mod attack time, so we can have it fade in. Combined with the delay time, we can create that kind of delayed mod. Then we've got attack time, so we said envelope type, so we can invert that. So we can quantize it, so we switch that on, go back to. It actually quantizes it to semitones, which is you can get some interesting effects here. So create some really kind of interesting sort of wonky stuff. We invert and then back through. That's pretty much it. So we can mod to invert, mod to envelope to LFO speed. Yeah, so basically what's happening there is The attack time I set on this destination then speeds up. So, I mean, it's all sort of fairly subtle, but actually when you start dialing these in on sort of particular effect, particular points, you get some really nice patches. And that's what I did on this one. Just think, it allows for some quite interesting organic stuff. So I know it's quite a lot of time to spend on the LFO, but there you have it. There is quite a lot of page 2 functions in there behind everything. Let's just have a little interlude. I just found this patch called Karplucks, which is a really nice sound. Put a bit of reverb on it, something a bit more subtle. Touch sensitivity, nice programmability on the, so we've got the velocity to the filter and the aftertouch to the filter. Very nice. Let's listen to some filters. So we'll just start with, as usual, a sawtooth, which is the way I tend to go. I'm in page 2 because it shows you the filter types. So we'll start off with the XA, the X, Oberheim X, which is SEM 2-pole low pass. And we get that lovely resonance. I've got the LFO running into it a little bit. And it's got a real... You can hear that kind of... Yes, it's a sing-song harmonic. Then we've got the SEM 2-pole high pass, which is, as you would find on a SEM module, that kind of... You can see the peak there. Then we've got a 2-pole band pass. You can hear what the resonance does. We can pick out some of that. The real low frequencies. Band pass. Then we've got a notch filter, which creates that sort of strange, almost phase type effect. Then we've got the OB-XA 2-pole low pass, which has a slightly smoother resonance. Then finally we've got the OB-XA X8 4-pole low pass. Not very resonant though. And I suppose this is one area where I might be that might be open to some criticism, because if it were me, I would want access to all of those filter types from the front panel. I would like to see, you know, because we don't get access to the SEM 2-pole notch and high pass from here, there's also no way to morph between those filter types like you can on a classic SEM. You can morph between low pass, high pass, band pass through notch, and you get that kind of really interesting filter shape. We can't do that here, unfortunately. It's interesting, when you get a look, you get stuck into the filters on an instrument like this, it's sort of surprising how less extreme they are than the filters that we've come to find in a lot more modern synths, you know, with loads of drive and loads of extreme resonance and sort of angry sounding. These are much more measured, much more almost sort of precise and musical, and that's the Oberheim way, and that's kind of what gives you that sound. Additional features, obviously, in the filter type, we can keyboard track, we set the keyboard tracking. That's kind of pretty much it. That's another big feature of the OB sound, and this sort of idea of the way it does its portamento is just sort of quite unique, and we get that kind of everything pulling together to kind of reach the note. And we can do that in page 2. We can set it from exponential, linear, equal time, bend up to 2. lots of different modes, which all sound ever so slightly different, but all actually equally as lovely as far as I'm concerned. Okay, we should probably look, there is another LFO in here, which is down here in the performance section. So yeah, coming down to the performance section, this is where we have quite a lot of controls actually, but there is an additional LFO, and you can see the rate here. We're in mod mode or in art mode. In mod mode, this becomes an LFO, so that will increase the depth, or we can bring it in with this little knob here. And the other thing that's cool is if we go into page 2 here, vibrato LFO wave, we can actually change that to be square, saw up, sample and hold, saw down, or noise, which is actually pretty cool. And that also ties into the fact that we can then feed that, if we want, into the sample and hold input from the vibrato LFO. So just a little bit of extra features there. So yeah, back to this. We can also set this to be the bend to work. So for instance, if we want oscillator 2 only to work at bend, we can that sounds like a third. Or if we hit the amount, there's a preset amount which is set in, again, in page 2, which I've just got to find it now. Bend lever amount, so we can set that to a maximum of 12, but that means we've got, if we take it out of oscillator 2 only, then it's both. So quite a lot of additional flexibility there. We haven't even got on to the arpeggiator yet, but before we do, transpose up and down. And we can have, again, mod can only affect one or either of the oscillators. Plenty of configuration there from what is essentially quite simple, but it's a nice big chunky control section. If we're in split mode, we can say whether we want this to actually affect the upper or the lower or both. Okay, before we get into the arpeggiator, I actually did get a question in from Fig8 from the initial YouTube video, because we asked for questions, some of which will be answered here just in the general course of the review, and some of which we'll do an extra video on Patreon, which I've already plugged, so I won't go on about. So this question came in from Fig8 a couple of days ago. I'm finding the arpeggiator impenetrable, perhaps an overview of functionality and performance. Many thanks. Well, Fig8, very pleased to hear that you've got an OB-X8. Lucky you. So into arpeggiator mode, press the arpeggiate button. So now any keys I press will start to arpeggiate. Now the mode buttons here, we've got down or up is not lit. That's because in this mode it actually plays in random order. If I press down, that's going down, or if I press up, up and down. Okay, we'll go back to random because I like that. Then, if we press and hold the up button, then we can set the octave range. I press hold, and then hold here. Now, it's playing nicely. So I'm going to stick some delay and a bit of plate on this, and then come back. So now I can play. So you can see it's actually quite nice and performative, so I can kind of create this kind of arpeggio bed, which is then held, and then I can play notes on top of it that don't trigger the arpeggiator. So that's quite a nice little feature there, actually. The arpeggiator, of course, is clockable, chord key limit. I think it's probably in global, so we'll just take a look. MIDI channel, key after touch. So ARC params, ARC clock. We can have it internal, clock input, MIDI DIN, or MIDI USB. So yeah, those are the things that we would have there. So yeah, this is turning into a bit of a whopper, but you know, I think with something of this largesse, it's worth spending a bit of extra time. One thing we haven't covered yet is the split and the layer mode. So getting into this is a little bit more involved than I thought. For the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. So if I hit split, quite often one of these buttons will be lit. So it just sort of shows the original banks. If it is lit, you just take it out of that upper or lower, and then suddenly you're in the split banks, and you've got, well, there are 16 banks of split sounds. Let's have a look. I'll go to a double first. This one's lovely. It's called 4 Vangelis. What happens when we do in split and double is essentially we have 2 patches, an upper and a lower patch, and each of those is up to 4 voices. So that's how it works, and it's actually kind of cool. So I'm going to put my my reverb on this because this one's called 4 Vangelis, so it's got to be, right? Sort of double layered lush again, you know, nice to have those effects, isn't it? I'll take that off. If we come in and have a look at the overall, when we in double or split mode, we have page 2 functions. There we go. So we can set the balance, we can set the transpose, the lower detune, whole chord, you know, parameters for each one. And it's the same with the split banks as well. If we go to a split sound here, let's see what we've got. There's one that I really liked. I'm just trying to find the split drums. This is really interesting because they're using the arpeggiator rate. Sounds really quite real. In fact, there's another one on the double. Let me see if I can find that. Exotic drums. Yeah, this one's a good one. Just sort of messing with the speed of the arpeggiator. Just, I really like that. Let's go to a more regular split. That sounds like a melody that I can't play, but isn't that, was it the 1970s? I can't remember who that band is, but it's a very aha-like melody. But you can hear we've got this lovely unison patch on the lower and a sort of quite a simple polysynth. So for what would be nice is, you know, I can put some effects on this and it'll have just a bit more vibe. But I want really, ideally, I mean, I'd want not to affect the lower half and only to affect the upper half. Now, this is where, you know, my original criticism about maybe having two pairs of outputs, like I know some of the other sequential stuff does, so that we could actually access the full stereo-ness of each side, but then affect them differently. There is a way around this, though. And if we come to our page 2 functions, come out of here, page 2, what we could do is we can set the pan mode to be 4 left and 4 right. So that, and then pan width was full. So now what will happen is, hopefully, the bass is fully over there on the left. And this pad sound is fully on the right. Now, obviously, we don't get that lovely stereo width, but there is a way of actually separating them as we see fit. Another thing which is a little bit of a gotcha, and it's quite old school in a way, these double and split patches are references to other programs that live in the general memory. Personally, I prefer it if we can have those splits and doubles and setups to be separate memories, so that if you then kind of go and write over another patch somewhere, you're not going to break your doubles or your splits. And that's something that I remember Roland were heavily criticised for doing it that way, and I don't think it's unfair for me to say, come on, Sequential, or sorry, come on, Oberheim, you know, perhaps we could have that as well, because then we're not going to overwrite any of our patches. I mean, even though we've got 5 banks, and each bank has got 16 groups, and then each group has got 8 memories, I don't know what that is, that's a lot. It would still be nice if the split groups had their own separate memory space. Okay, one thing we haven't looked at yet is the envelopes, which are 2 regular ADSR envelopes. Filter envelope gets its depth from the modulation here, and the volume envelope is fixed. We can send the pitch to the filter envelope as well by using the F envelope button here, but that's pretty much the routing that we've got. Nice and simple. I've got a noise, bring that down a bit, just to give you an idea of the snappiness of those envelopes. They can go pretty slow as well. In fact, there are 2 envelope curves in here. We've got the OB-8, which is a slightly softer attack decay phase, and then the OBXa, which is a bit tighter. So this is where we see a little bit of that digital kind of business going on, because I'm guessing the filter envelope, certainly the characteristics of those are handled digitally. You can hear it ever so slightly. I mean, it's not night and day, but essentially the OB-8 is a little more kind of rounded, and the OBX8 is a bit more precise and snappy. So that's it. There are no other controls for the envelope, nothing like looping or any of that stuff. I mean, that would be kind of nice, and probably something they could do in the page 2 firmware, and sort of bring it into line with perhaps some more modern synthesis capabilities. So it's coming to that time where I've got to tell you what I think. What do I think about the OBXa? Undoubtedly, it's a beautiful thing to play with, a beautiful thing to have. It does feel like very luxurious and kind of, it's not quite muscle car, because it's, you know, I mean, even though it's big, it's still, there is a certain amount of status to it, and I love what it represents. I really think it sounds fantastic. I would like to have seen some more modern synthesizer features in it, like certainly extra outputs, and certainly a little bit more, you know, I know the aesthetic is lovely, we could have had a few more front panel controls. So I'm guessing, you know, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for a first synthesizer, unless you've just got a ton of money and you just really want to have something like this. It feels very much like it's a luxury purchase for people who have a nostalgia for this kind of stuff, or, you know, people who have got plenty of cash and they just want a really, really nice analog polysynth, because that's what this is. But ultimately, you know, this isn't going to be for everybody. You know, not everybody can afford this. Yes, would I like one? I'd love to, but I can't afford it. And also, it's big and I need space for it. But I'm just really glad it exists, and it's really nice to have something that has so much essence of Oberheim. You know, this is kind of essentially, you know, all of those years of experience brought into a beautiful analog, big, fat polysynth. There is the OB-6, which has a lot of that analog VCO goodness. It doesn't quite have the same girth and monster as this does, but it does have effects, and it is more affordable. Some people might just find that suits their budget a little bit better, and they certainly get sort of quite a lot of the essence of the Oberheim sound. We reviewed the OB-6, and I must admit, it did make me feel very warm inside. But this guy is the real deal. If you can afford it, then go for it. Anyhow, that's it. Thanks for watching, and thanks to GPU Audio for sponsoring this video. Why not head over to gpu.audio/sonicstate to sign up to be the first to check out their new modulation bundle. See you next time.